Hey folks, Malforian here, and today a bit of a discussion video. This is probably going to be one of my rambling ones, so do stick with it if you enjoy those. Today we're going to be talking about railroading in EU5, not the kind with trains and stations, but the kind with forcing nations to do what they did historically, so a player can kind of insert themselves into a historical kind of situation, no matter when it really applies in the game. This has come up a lot recently because obviously the earlier start time in EU5, people want to play out the same things that happened in EU4 for the most part, or even just historical situations that happen, like the Burgundian succession, you know, the colonization of the New World, many other things as well, obviously outside of Europe, but they're the ones that kind of come up quite often. And will EU5 kind of railroad nations to be more historically accurate, or will they go the other way? And I did a vote about this on the channel yesterday, and 58% of you said you'd want it more railroaded, 25% of you said you wanted it less railroaded, and 17% of you agreed that they're called railways. So, you know, a good portion of you there being very sensible and calling them railways. The other two probably more relevant for this discussion. So I'm kind of surprised by this, to be honest. I always thought that people thought EU4 was too railroaded because of the mission trees and things that kind of push you towards these historical playthroughs for nations. And I will agree with that. I've said that in my EU5 coverage, that I think playing as certain nations, you are very railroaded into playing them as they historically kind of acted. So, for example, if you play as Portugal, it's all about exploration, trying to set up trade in the Far East and things like that. If you play as Scotland, you set up the old alliance with France, and then you try to do some other things as well that they historically did or historically tried to do. And the same with many nations, pretty much everyone with a mission tree, at least most of that mission tree is pushing you down a certain route. And to be honest, if you play as that nation and you don't do the mission trees, you're kind of putting yourself, I wouldn't say at a disadvantage, because does the AI ever really try finish their mission trees? I don't think they really do, to be honest. I think they can do by accident, but they don't tend to do it out of being designed to do it. Let me know in the comments down below if I'm wrong about that. As I've said before, I've not played EU4 in about, I don't know, 6 or 7 years now. I've been waiting for EU5 to come out, and finally we are getting to that point, so it's cool to see. I don't think the AI generally goes out to actually finish the mission trees. So as I was saying, you do kind of put yourself at a disadvantage by not doing them, just because the bonuses generally are so good. But at the end of the day, I guess you could play Portugal and just try take over Europe, for example, and kind of ignore the mission trees for the most part. You are missing the bonuses from them, but I do suppose the AI isn't getting those either, so I guess it doesn't really matter. But you know what I mean, you are missing all those bonuses if you don't do the mission trees, so I think most players kind of feel like they should do them for the most part, or at least try and do at least some of them, and then do whatever they want, you know, map painting for the most part, I would imagine, for most players. And as I said, I always thought the community generally didn't like that, but looking at these scores, it looks like people actually want it more railroaded. I have seen some discussions recently about wanting the game to like play out historically, and then you're like the chaos agent, I guess, trying to mess it up a little bit, which I can see how that would be something you'd want to do. Do you want to, as I said, play through the game, and then the Burgundian succession happens, and then events happen as they did historically? Spain will always colonize this area, Portugal will always colonize this bit, England will always be here, France here, and then maybe you're playing as the Ottomans, and you're the one kind of non-historical nation you're going to go colonize, because historically they didn't for the most part. You're the kind of chaos factor. You go in there, and the AI is trying to play out historically, and you're kind of messing it up as the Ottomans in this example. I can see why people would want that. I think it's very, very hard for a game to actually work that way, because so much of the game would have to be railroaded. I think it would just be crazy for it to work that way. Like, it really doesn't make sense to me. I'm not saying that you're wrong if you want this. I have always said the one cool thing about EU4, well, there's a lot of cool things about EU4, but one of the things I like the most is the fact that there are historical events, and you actually learn a lot about history by playing the game. I know it's a bit of a meme, you know, I learned history from Paradox games, but you do actually learn quite a bit from EU4 by playing through the events that you get as certain nations. You actually learn quite a bit, and I can see how people want those to happen, and then, as I say, either go historically with them, or maybe change the outcome, do something else. So, you know, I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing, but I just think that, like, actually having the game play out historically is incredibly difficult for them to do. And I would imagine if it was an option, it'd be one of these things that they've said before, where we put all this money and effort into making the historical play out campaign, and then no one played it. Everyone just played the standard game and didn't play the, you know, everyone plays out historical mode. And to be honest, personally for myself, I think some of how it would play out is cool. I think maybe like the first 50 or 100 years if it was semi-railroaded, so you kind of got the idea that you're playing through history. That is one difference to this, to say Civilization or Old World or some of these other 4X games, where you are generally playing on a randomized map, and even if you play on a historical map, like nothing ever plays out historical, nothing's ever set to do it that way. I guess that is the one difference with Paradox games. They are kind of focused and played in history, I suppose. You're always playing on Earth, unless you play one of the mods or the randomized maps and things like that. And I think not a lot of players actually do that. So, you know, it is different, I guess, for Paradox games. You are kind of playing on a historical map, and I imagine most players kind of want to play through history rather than, for example, in Civ 6, if you play as France, you're just on a random world and you're just playing as France, but it's not really playing as France in many ways. Again, Civ, a lot of railroading around that as well for certain nations. Again, if you play as, you know, England, a lot of the bonuses are around one area of the game. If you don't play around that area of the game, you're kind of wasting the point of playing as England. But that's a whole nother discussion for another video. But anyway, back to what I was saying. Yeah, I'm kind of surprised that a lot of people want it more historically railroaded. I can see why. Less historically railroaded, I would have thought this would have got more votes. And I thought this is where people would actually want the game to go. But I think there is a middle ground for this, and that is where events that happened in real life, you could not make them generic, but have them trigger in different scenarios. So, for example, obviously England with King Henry setting up his own church because he wanted to get divorced from his wife. It would be very hard for EU5 that far into the game for the AI to kind of wait for this to happen. And then when this happened historically with King Henry during a campaign, would he even be king at that point? Who knows? You could hard code it so he always became king around then, and then always had an event where he had a lot of wives and all those kind of things. You could have that happen. You could program the game to do that. I mean, what would happen if England's gone? I guess the event just wouldn't happen. But if there was England, and then it forced a King Henry, it forced him to have multiple wives, and then it forced this Protestant event to happen, you could set that up. I think it would be better, though, if that kind of loose scenario happened, but it could happen anywhere in the world. Not just Catholicism, although maybe you could limit it to that because that's the historical one. I'm sure there's others elsewhere. From my own knowledge, though, that's the only one that comes to the top of my head. You could have it, though, where it could happen to any nation that's Catholic, but like the same kind of like stamp of events happened in that country instead. So maybe this could even happen to, say, France in the game. They could have a ruler. He could have an event proc where he's trying to have children and each wife's not giving him one, so he's trying to get divorced and all of this. And then ultimately he goes up against the Pope, kind of loses, and goes off and sulks and makes his own religion pretty much. I think that could be a better way for it to work, where the outline of an event can happen, but it can be kind of like stamped onto a different nation depending on how an event could happen. I think that could work. That could be a way to get these events, but have them not play out as they did historically at those times. You know, because again, I think it's very hard for them to do that. I think this is a better way for it to happen, where you could have all these different events kind of, this is what happened historically, and then you can almost just switch out the nation that it happened to, depending on how your campaign is playing. So again, if Portugal and Spain aren't in the New World, maybe it's Spain and Scotland. Maybe the Pope would get them together and say, you know, as in real life with Portugal and Spain, where they split up the New World for themselves, maybe the same event would happen, but it would be Scotland and Spain. And they'd say, Scotland, you have this line from here. Spain, you have everything the other side of it. And then it's a similar event that happened historically. It's dynamic to how you're playing EU5 and how your kind of campaign is playing out a little bit more. I think if people want a bit more railroading, I think that's the only way you could really do it, where it is railroaded, but more like these events can happen at the time they did historically, but it's more contextual as to what's going on in the game, and less so, you know, hard and fast. This always happens to England at this time with this king, and this is the outcome. It would instead be this could happen somewhere in the Catholic world, and then kind of the same events happen, but they happen to this other nation. I think that'd be the better way of doing it. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. That's pretty much what this video is. Just a little bit of a ramble about this because the poll I did actually got a lot of votes, so I kind of thought it'd be interesting to talk about, and we could talk about it in the comments down below. And I'm not too sure myself. I do like it, as I said, where you play out events and you kind of learn about them, and you are playing probably EU5 more to see historical things, more so than I said like in Civilization or something where you very much don't do that. I think I would like some of these events, but I don't think the game should be railroaded to force them to happen. And you're pretty much just watching, you know, like those YouTube videos where you see like 200 years of European history and you just watch a map change as it changed historically. I don't really want to play a game that's basically just that, and then I'm in there as well, and nothing I can do can affect the other things from happening. So even if I wanted to prevent a war from happening, because it's hard-coded, as long as the two nations existed, it would always happen. I don't think I'd really enjoy playing that game. I'm sure some of you would. Again, I'm not trying to say the way you want to play it is wrong. I just don't think it kind of makes sense for it to work that way. But anyway, if you've got any other ideas how this could work, maybe you could, bring back the lucky nation system again from EU4. But I think Johan already said that isn't coming back. I'm pretty sure he did in one of the latest dev diaries. How far do you want the game to push nations to act as they did historically? Or do you want them to have some kind of buff to certain nations so they always do quite well? And, does that make sense? Again, I can also see, people don't want to see the Ottomans always invade Russia, which happens pretty much every game. They never tend to go west or even go further into Africa. They do over the long term, but we've all played those games where they go straight from Muscovy, straight to Russia, kind of blob up there, and then get wiped out by somebody else later on for the most part. Maybe we would want them to act a little bit more historically than they did. Maybe just push them in certain areas. So again, for Spain colonizing, maybe have them always prioritize where they historically did colonize. So if they get to that point, you would see them colonize Mexico, other areas of South America for the most part, Florida, but then it obviously plays out very different. But at least they're kind of pushed towards those specific areas to begin with, so you get a version of what would happen historically. Anyway, we could go at this all day as to what could happen, but I'll leave it there for today. As always, hit that like button if you've enjoyed it, subscribe if you're new here. As I said, just a bit of a random discussion video today as we wait for the dev diary this week. And the dev diary tomorrow is covering a new flavorful system in EU5, so it's going to be very interesting to see exactly what that is. So do make sure to return tomorrow and we can talk about that, but we'll leave it there for today, and I'll see you in the next one.